He was a titan of industry. The man on the cover of Forbes. Living in a penthouse that touched the clouds. She was his brilliant, beautiful, and 7 months pregnant wife. But in one single, brutal moment, her perfect world was shattered. He traded her for a younger model, his ambitious mistress, leaving his expectant wife with nothing but a pittance and the cold, hard streets. He thought he had destroyed her. He thought she would disappear. He never imagined that the woman he cast aside would spend the next 3 years forging an empire from the ashes of her broken heart. This is the unbelievable true story of Amelia Hayes. The woman who didn't just get even, she got everything. The city lights of New York spread out beneath their 80th floor penthouse like a carpet of fallen stars. From this vantage point, inside the gilded cage Ethan Vance had so carefully constructed, Amelia Hayes had once felt like the queen of the world. The air itself seemed different up here, thinner, crisper, smelling of success and expensive perfume. Tonight, it smelled only of lies. Amelia ran a hand over the taut curve of her stomach. A small, involuntary smile touching her lips as she felt a gentle kick from within. Mina. They had already decided on the name. It was the only thing lately that felt real. This new life growing inside her. Everything else, the lavish parties, the fawning society pages that called them the city's golden couple. And especially the man she loved, felt increasingly distant. Like a photograph fading in the sun. Ethan Vance, CEO of the colossal real estate empire, Vance and Sterling Holdings, was a man sculpted from ambition and charm. When Amelia had met him 5 years ago, he was a rising star. And she was a gifted architect at Innovate Architecture, one of the city's most prestigious firms. Her name already attached to 2 award-winning designs. They were a perfect match, his business acumen, her creative vision. They had planned to build an empire together. You're too brilliant to be working for someone else, Ames, he had told her, his voice a silken trap. When we have this baby, you should step back. Focus on us. On our family. The company is secure. We are secure. She had agreed. How could she not? She loved him. And the dream he sold her was intoxicating. So, she'd left her promising career, trading her blueprints and hard hat for sonograms and prenatal yoga. She had thrown herself into creating the perfect home, the perfect nest for their coming child. While Ethan's late nights at the office became later, his business trips more frequent, his phone, once left casually on the nightstand, was now perpetually attached to his hand, screen down. When she questioned him, he'd flash that disarming smile. Building a legacy for our daughter. My love. It all takes time. Tonight, the time for lies had run out. He came home just as the last embers of sunset bled from the sky. He didn't kiss her. Didn't even glance at her swollen belly. He walked straight to the marble-topped bar, his movements stiff and rehearsed, and poured 2 glasses of scotch. He only ever poured 2 glasses when he was about to deliver bad news. Amelia, he began, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a subordinate. We need to talk. A cold dread, sharp and sudden, pierced through her. Ethan. What is it? You're scaring me. He slid a thick manila envelope across the polished mahogany of the coffee table. It landed with a soft, final thud. "I'm leaving," he said. The words were simple, clinical. Yet they detonated in the silent room, shattering the fragile peace. Amelia stared at him, her mind refusing to process the statement. "Leaving? What do you mean? Leaving? For a business trip? You just got back." He took a slow sip of his scotch, his eyes as cold as glass. "No, Amelia. I'm leaving you." The room tilted. The city lights blurred into a meaningless smear. "For who?" she whispered, the words catching in her throat like shards of glass. "It doesn't matter," he said. But his gaze flickered a micro-expression of guilt he couldn't quite suppress. "Tell me," she demanded, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "After 5 years of marriage, with your child inside me, you owe me that much. Tell me her name." He sighed, a sound of pure annoyance, as if her heartbreak was a tedious inconvenience. "Isabella," he finally said. "Isabella Rossi." The name hit Amelia like a physical blow. Isabella Rasha Piranha in a designer dress. A junior executive at his own company. Known for her ruthless ambition and for using her siren-like beauty to get ahead. Amelia had met her at company functions. Had felt the woman's covetous eyes on her life. On her husband. She had dismissed it as professional jealousy. How naive she had been. "She understands me," Ethan continued. The justification tumbling out now. Polished and practiced. "She understands the pressures I'm under. She's ambitious. Driven. With you. It's all about feelings. About nesting. I need a partner. Amelia. Not a housewife. You've become complacent." Complacent? The word was a slap in the face. He had begged her to leave her career, to build this nest he now scorned. Her shock began to curdle into a hot, righteous anger. "How long, Ethan?" "A year," he admitted, looking away. "Maybe a little more." A year. A whole year of shared smiles. Of whispered plans for their daughter. Of him holding her and telling her he loved her. Every memory was now tainted. A scene from a well-acted play. He had been living a double life while she was growing their child. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. The envelope. He gestured. Contains the divorce papers. I've been more than generous. A one-time payment. You sign it. Along with the NDA. And you walk away. No mess. No drama. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a settlement agreement. The number was substantial enough to look good on paper. But for a man of his billionaire status, it was pocket change. A nuisance fee. And then she saw it, the non-disclosure agreement. A thicket of legal essay designed to gag her. To erase her from his history. Her eyes scanned the cold, hard text. She was to make no public statements. Give no interviews. Write no books. She was to vanish from the world of Ethan Vance as if she had never existed. A memory, sharp and painful, flashed in her mind. A warm summer evening years ago. Sitting on the fire escape of her tiny first apartment. Ethan, his eyes bright with dreams, was sketching on a napkin. One day. Ames. He'd said. Grabbing her hand. We'll build something that lasts forever. An empire of our own. Vance and Hayes. What about Vance and Sterling? She had teased. Mr. Sterling was his father's old partner. A silent investor. He's the old guard. Ethan had laughed. We're the future. Now. That future was a smoldering ruin. She looked at the man before her. A stranger in her husband's expensive suit. The boy who had sketched dreams on a napkin was gone. Replaced by a ruthless king guarding a tarnished throne. I won't sign it. She said. Her voice quiet but firm. Ethan's face hardened. Don't be a fool. Amelia. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I built this world. I can just as easily unmake you in it. Take the deal. It's the last nice thing I'll ever do for you. He finished his scotch. Placed the glass down with a decisive click. And walked towards the door. Not looking back. Ethan. She cried out. A raw, desperate sound. Our daughter. What about Mina? He paused at the door. His hand on the handle. For a fleeting moment. She saw a crack in his armor. A flicker of something human. Then it was gone. Sealed over with ice. Isabella is young. We'll have our own children. He said. The words hanging in the air like poison. You'll be provided for. That's more than most get. And with that, he opened the door and walked out of her life. Leaving Amelia alone in the silent penthouse. The signed divorce papers on the table like a death certificate for the life she once knew. The golden cage had burst open. Not to free her, but to cast her out into the cold. The city lights outside no longer looked like stars. They looked like the mocking eyes of a world that had suddenly and brutally turned against her. The silence Ethan left behind was heavier than any sound. For 2 days. Amelia drifted through the vast, opulent emptiness of the penthouse. A ghost in her own life. The scent of his cologne lingered in the closet. A cruel reminder of the man who was now a stranger. The baby room. Painted a soft buttercup yellow and filled with toys she had lovingly assembled. Was a room of promises broken. Every object was a monument to a shared future that had been a lie. The third day brought the lawyers. Not men in suits for a civilized discussion. But a notification. Cold and impersonal. Slipped under her door. She had 48 hours to vacate the premises. The property was solely in the name of a trust controlled by Vance and Sterling Holdings. She had never questioned it. She had trusted him. Panic. Cold and sharp. Finally broke through her stupor. She tried to call her credit card company to pay for a hotel. Only to be met with a sterile, automated voice, "This card has been cancelled." She tried to log into their joint bank account. The one she had poured her savings into when they first got married. The balance was zero. A transaction history showed a single, massive transfer to an offshore account 2 days prior. He had systematically, meticulously, surgically removed her from his life. The generous settlement he had offered now felt like a taunt. It was contingent on her signing the NDA. Without it, she had nothing. With it, she had a pittance and a gag order. With her own funds gone, she had no choice. A courier arrived. A young man who wouldn't meet her eyes. And she signed away her voice. Her story. Her name. In exchange for a check that wouldn't even cover 3 months' rent in a decent part of the city. Leaving the penthouse was a blur of humiliation. The doorman, who had greeted her with a warm "Good morning, Mrs. Vance," for years, now stared at the floor as she struggled with her 2 suitcases, a box of personal effects, and the crushing weight of her own body. He held the door open, his face a mask of professional indifference. She was no longer Mrs. Vance. She was a liability. She found a small 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, a world away from the gleaming spires of Manhattan. The air was thick with the smell of sizzling onions and exhaust fumes. The paint on the walls was peeling. The faucet in the kitchen dripped a relentless, maddening rhythm. And the radiator clanked and hissed like a dying beast. This was her new reality. Desperate. She swallowed her pride and called Michael Renner, her old boss at Innovate Architecture. He had always been her champion, the one who had predicted she'd be one of the greats. "Michael. It's Amelia Hayes," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Amelia," he finally said, his tone strained. I heard what happened. I'm sorry. I need a job." "Michael," she said, cutting to the chase. "Anything. I can freelance. I can work from home. I need to work." The silence stretched again, thick with unspoken words. "I can't. Amelia," he said, his voice low. "There's nothing here for you. We're downsizing that department." "I don't believe you," she said, a new kind of cold seeping into her bones. "You told me I'd always have a place there." "Things change," he said. And the corporate chill in his voice was unmistakable. "Look. Off the record. Ethan Vance has a very long reach. His company is one of our biggest clients now. Having you on the payroll, it would be a conflict of interest. It would be unwise. You're seen as a liability. Amelia. I'm truly sorry." He hung up. The dial tone buzzed in her ear, the sound of every door in her old life slamming shut. Ethan hadn't just left her. He had salted the earth behind him, ensuring she couldn't even return to the career she had given up for him. He hadn't just unmade her. He had blacklisted her. The following weeks were a brutal education in survival. She navigated the labyrinthine bureaucracy of social services, her pregnant belly a silent testament to her fall from grace. She learned to budget by the dime, to choose between buying fresh fruit or paying the electricity bill on time. The loneliness was a physical presence, a heavy cloak she couldn't take off. One afternoon, struggling up the 5 flights of stairs with a bag of groceries, she dropped her keys. As she bent down, a wave of dizziness washed over her, and she slumped against the wall, tears of sheer exhaustion and frustration finally overflowing. "Here, my dear. Let me help you." The voice was kind, accented with the gentle lilt of Eastern Europe. An elderly woman with silver hair braided in a neat crown and eyes that held a lifetime of wisdom was holding out her keys. It was her next-door neighbor, a woman she'd only ever nodded to in the hallway. "I am Elena Petrova," the woman said. helping Amelia with her grocery bag. "You look like you are carrying the weight of the world. Not just a baby." That small act of kindness broke something open in Amelia. Inside her bare apartment, over a cup of weak tea, the whole story came pouring out. Mrs. Petrova listened patiently. Her hands, gnarled from decades of work, patting Amelia's. She was a retired seamstress, a widow who had seen her own share of hardship. She didn't offer platitudes or pity. She offered practical help. When Amelia went into labor 2 months later, it was Mrs. Petrova who held her hand in the taxi to the public hospital. The birth was long and arduous. A 24-hour ordeal she faced without a partner, without family. But when the nurse finally placed the tiny, wailing baby in her arms, a fierce, protective love surged through Amelia, so potent it eclipsed everything else. She looked down at her daughter's perfect, scrunched-up face. "Hello, Mina," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's you and me now." The joy of that moment was pure and absolute. But it was tinged with the bitter reality of their circumstances. As she held her daughter in the sterile, crowded hospital ward, she made a silent, solemn vow. She would not let Ethan Vance's cruelty define their lives. She would not be a victim. For Mina, she would fight back. She didn't know how. But as she looked at the tiny fingers curled around her own, Amelia knew she had to find a way. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building a future. A real future. On the ruins of the old one. 3 years crawled by. Each day a testament to the grinding monotony of survival. The city that had once been Amelia's playground was now a relentless taskmaster. Her life was a carefully constructed mosaic of low-wage jobs. A patchwork of shifts designed around Mina's daycare schedule. Mornings were spent in the greasy spoon haze of a diner, her apron smelling of burnt coffee and fried bacon as she balanced plates and forced smiles for tips that barely covered the subway fare. Evenings, after picking up a chattering, happy Mina, were for a hurried dinner and bedtime stories. And nights, when the city finally exhaled and Mina was asleep, were for her third job, cleaning the soulless, empty offices of a downtown law firm. A ghost haunting corridors of power she could no longer access. Mina was her son. A bright, inquisitive child with her father's charming smile and her mother's determined eyes. She was blissfully unaware of their poverty. Her world was filled with the magic of sidewalk chalk drawings. Stories about brave princesses who saved themselves. And the unwavering, all-encompassing love of her mother. Amelia shielded her from the harsh realities with the ferocity of a lioness. The eviction notices. The carefully counted coins at the grocery store. The threadbare winter coat, none of it ever touched Mina. Her daughter's laughter was the fuel that kept Amelia going. But in the deep, silent hours of the night, after the office floors were mopped and the trash cans emptied, another Amelia emerged. This was the architect. The dreamer. The woman who had once designed award-winning buildings. In the small corner of her cramped apartment that she called her studio, with a second-hand drafting tablet she'd bought with a month's worth of saved tips, she would work from midnight until 3 a.m. Fueled by cheap instant coffee. She would design. She poured all her frustration, her anger, her stifled creativity into these designs. They were radical. innovative, and deeply personal. She designed sustainable, low-cost housing that felt like a community, not a complex. She designed public parks that integrated nature with urban landscapes in ways no one else was imagining. This was her rebellion. Her silent scream against the world that had cast her out. To give her work a voice, she started a blog. She called it The Urban Phoenix. A name that felt both aspirational and deeply true. Under the pseudonym A.H. Phoenix, she posted her renderings, her essays on the future of architecture, and her critiques of the sterile, profit-driven glass boxes that were sprouting all over the city, many of them built by companies like Vance and Sterling Holdings. The blog was an anonymous shout into the digital void. But slowly, miraculously, the void started to shout back. At first, it was just a few comments from architecture students. Then, other professionals started to take notice. Her posts were shared in niche forums. Her ideas were debated, praised, and sometimes criticized. But they were being seen. The Urban Phoenix began to cultivate a small but fiercely loyal following, people who were hungry for a vision of architecture that was about people, not just profits. Meanwhile, the world of Ethan Vance continued to spin in a different orbit. He and Isabella Rossi were the darlings of the New York social and business scene. Their photos were splashed across magazines, at galas, on yachts, cutting ribbons for new, ostentatious skyscrapers. Vance and Sterling Holdings was more powerful than ever. But if one looked closely, past the glossy veneer of success, the cracks were beginning to show. Isabella, now a senior vice president, was pushing for more power. Her ambition a constant, gnawing pressure on Ethan. His business decisions, once bold and strategic, were becoming increasingly reckless. Driven by a need to top his last success, to build higher, shinier, more expensive monuments to his own ego. One night, in his sterile, minimalist penthouse, the same one he had shared with Amelia, now redecorated in cold chrome and black leather by Isabella, Ethan was nursing a tumbler of whiskey. An acquisition had fallen through. A project was over budget. And a tense argument with Isabella still echoed in his ears. Bored and restless, he found himself scrolling through an industry news aggregator on his tablet. A link caught his eye: Is the Urban Phoenix the future of American architecture? He clicked. He saw designs that were audacious, brilliant, and strangely familiar in their underlying philosophy, a focus on human-centric design that he hadn't thought about since his earliest days with Amelia. He scoffed at the writer's idealism but found himself scrolling through post after post, intrigued by the sheer talent on display. He saw a design for a cantilevered community library that was both breathtakingly beautiful and structurally ingenious. Who the hell is this A.H. Phoenix? He muttered to himself, a flicker of professional jealousy stirring within him. He was the king of New York real estate. How had this anonymous blogger, this nobody, come up with something so compelling? He dismissed it as the work of some academic dreamer and closed the tablet, pouring himself another drink, completely unaware that he had just been admiring the work of the wife he had thrown away. A few weeks later, Amelia received an email through her blog's contact form. It was different from the usual comments or fan mail. The sender's address was encrypted, and the message was brief and direct. Subject: Your vision. MS. Phoenix. I have been following your work for some time. Your vision is not just compelling. It is necessary. I believe it is also highly profitable. I am a private investor interested in turning your designs into reality. If you are interested in a partnership that would provide you with the capital and resources to build your own firm on your own terms, I propose a meeting. Discretion is assured. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. It could be a scam. A cruel joke. But it could also be real. After 3 years in the wilderness. After countless nights of thankless work. A door had appeared in the wall she had been fruitlessly beating against. With trembling hands. Her mind racing with a mixture of terror and hope. She typed a single word reply. When? This was it. The first tremor of the earthquake that was about to shake Ethan Vance's world to its foundations. The phoenix was no longer just sketching in the ashes. She was preparing to rise. The address sent to her was for a discreet private club in Midtown. The kind of place with no sign. Just a polished brass number on a heavy oak door. It was a world Amelia had once belonged to. A world she now felt like an imposter in. She had spent a week's food money on a simple but professional-looking second-hand dress and had left Mina with a beaming Mrs. Petrova. Promising to be back to tuck her in. Walking into the hushed, wood-paneled interior felt like stepping onto a stage. A man in a tailored suit met her at the door. Ms. Phoenix. Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in the library. The name hit her with the force of a physical shock. Sterling. As in Vance and Sterling Holdings. It couldn't be. Julian Sterling was Ethan's silent partner. The bold guard Ethan had been so eager to usurp. He was a legendary, almost mythical figure in the industry. A man who hadn't been seen publicly in years. She was led into a room lined with floor-to-ceiling books. The air smelling of old leather and wealth. A man stood by the fireplace. His back to her. He was older. Perhaps in his late 60s. With a shock of white hair and an impeccably tailored suit that hung on a still powerful frame. When he turned, his eyes, a piercing shade of blue, assessed her with an unnerving intensity. This was Julian Sterling. Ms. Hayes. He said. His voice a low, gravelly baritone. He hadn't used her pseudonym. Or do you prefer Phoenix? I must say, it's remarkably fitting. Amelia's carefully constructed composure threatened to crumble. You know who I am. I make it my business to know everything about the people who interest me. He said, gesturing to a leather armchair. And you, my dear, are the most interesting person to emerge in the world of architecture in a decade. Please. Sit. She sat. Her back ramrod straight. Why am I here? Mr. Sterling. Are you here on Ethan's behalf? A dry, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. Ethan. He scoffed. The name dripping with disdain. Ethan Vance is a boy who inherited a kingdom and thinks he built it. He has taken the solid foundation his father and I built and is turning it into a gaudy casino. No. I am not here on his behalf. I am here because I have a vested interest in seeing that boy's casino go bust. He explained that his partnership with Ethan's father had been one of mutual respect and shared vision. When the elder Vance passed away, Julian had agreed to stay on as a silent partner to honor his friend's legacy, letting the ambitious young Ethan take the reins. It was a decision he had come to regret profoundly. He's a gambler. Not a builder. Sterling said, his gaze fixed on the fire. He leverages the company's assets for vanity projects, prioritizes flash over stability, and surrounds himself with sycophants like that woman, Isabella Rossi. He is steering a perfectly good ship directly towards an iceberg. And my name is still on the hull. He paused, turning his piercing gaze back to her. For 2 years, I have been looking for a strategic countermove. A way to protect my investment and, frankly, my legacy. I considered a hostile takeover. A proxy war on the board. All ugly, messy business. And then, I discovered a blog called The Urban Phoenix. I saw designs that were not just brilliant, but strategic, sustainable, community-focused at the very antithesis of everything Ethan is building. I saw the future. And I knew I had found my weapon. Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't just an architect to him. She was a weapon to be aimed at her ex-husband. You want to use me to destroy him? She said. The words tasting like ash. No. MS. Hayes. He corrected her gently. I want to invest in you. I want to give you the resources to build a company that will make his obsolete. Ethan's downfall will simply be a byproduct of your success. There's a difference. He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the conflict warring within her. He leaned forward, his voice softening. He didn't just leave you. I know he had you blacklisted. I know Michael Renner at Innovate Architecture folded under the pressure. I know you've spent the last 3 years cleaning offices to feed your daughter. I am not offering you revenge. I am offering you justice. The chance to reclaim the career he stole from you. To build a future for your child on your own terms. I will be your silent partner. The money. The connections. They will be yours. But the vision. The leadership. The company. That will be all Amelia Hayes. She thought of Mina. She thought of the eviction notices. The condescending looks from social workers. The soul-crushing exhaustion. She thought of her designs. Her ideas languishing on a blog. Julian Sterling wasn't offering a handout. He was offering a battlefield on which she could finally fight. Her revenge wouldn't be a messy personal affair. It would be a corporate execution. Clean and final. What do you call this new company? He asked. Already knowing her answer. A slow smile spread across Amelia's face. The first genuine, confident smile in years. Phoenix Architecture. She said. He nodded. A corresponding smile in his eyes. Perfect. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. With Sterling's backing, Phoenix Architecture was officially incorporated. Amelia leased a modest but stylish office space in a burgeoning arts district. A far cry from the corporate towers of Midtown. And deliberately so. She used Sterling's network to her advantage. But she was the one in control. Her first move was strategic and deeply satisfying. She reached out to 2 of the most talented young architects at Innovate Architecture. The very firm that had rejected her. She knew they were frustrated. Their creative ideas constantly shot down by the conservative, profit-obsessed management. She didn't offer them outrageous salaries. She offered them something far more valuable, a chance to build something meaningful. She met them in a coffee shop, spreading her designs for the urban phoenix across the table. Their eyes lit up. I'm not building glass boxes for billionaires. Amelia told them, her voice resonating with a passion they hadn't seen in years. I'm building a new kind of city. Are you in? They didn't hesitate. They handed in their resignations the next day, sending a small but significant shockwave through their old firm. Amelia Hayes was no longer a victim. She was a CEO. She had a team. She had capital. And she had a blueprint not just for a new building, but for a new life. The game was on. Phoenix architecture did not explode onto the New York scene with the force of a supernova. It was more insidious, more strategic. Amelia started small, taking on the projects the Goliaths like Vance and Sterling wouldn't touch: a nonprofit community arts center, a pro bono design for a homeless shelter, the retrofitting of an old factory into sustainable, affordable loft apartments. These weren't the headline-grabbing, skyline-altering projects. But they were smart. They were portfolio builders. And they got noticed. Each completed project was a masterclass in the Phoenix philosophy: innovative design, sustainable materials, and a deep, intuitive connection to the community it served. The Art Center won a prestigious local design award. The factory lofts were featured in a major architectural magazine, praised for their human-first approach. Word began to spread through the industry. There was a new player in town. And she was changing the rules. Amelia, once anonymous, stepped into the spotlight. Julian Sterling had coached her, but her presence was all her own. In interviews, she was poised, articulate, and fiercely passionate. She didn't speak of her past. But she didn't need to. The media, sniffing out the contours of a spectacular story, began to piece it together. The narrative was irresistible: the single mother, cast aside by a ruthless tycoon, who had built a visionary company from the ground up. She wasn't just an architect. She was a symbol of resilience. The success of Phoenix began to have a tangible effect on Vance and Sterling Holdings, a progressive city council, enamored with Phoenix's community-centric vision, awarded a lucrative public park project to Amelia's firm, a project Ethan had considered a lock. Then, a wealthy, eco-conscious tech billionaire who was planning a new headquarters publicly announced he was dropping Vance and Sterling in favor of Phoenix architecture, citing their forward-thinking ethos. Ethan Vance watched Amelia's ascent with a mixture of disbelief and mounting rage. At first, he dismissed her company as a boutique charity firm. Now, the charity firm was stealing his clients and his headlines. The city that had once worshipped him was now fawning over the woman he had discarded. His paranoia grew, festering in the sterile luxury of his life. He couldn't understand how she had done it. Where had she gotten the capital? The connections? He launched a private investigation. And when the report came back, he stared at the name on the page in stunned fury: Julian Sterling. His own partner. The old man he had mocked and sidelined had been secretly funding his ex-wife's corporate insurgency against him. It was a betrayal so profound it left him reeling. The pressure began to take its toll. His decisions became more erratic, his temper more volatile. He pushed his teams to the breaking point, demanding bigger, more extravagant designs to outshine Amelia. But they came across as desperate and soulless. The atmosphere at Vance and Sterling grew toxic. Isabella Rossi, ever the opportunist, saw the writing on the wall. The power couple image was fracturing. The company's stock was dipping. Ethan was becoming a liability, not an asset. She began quietly consulting with lawyers, exploring how to disentangle her finances from his. She started discreetly selling off her shares in the company, a little at a time, and making quiet inquiries with competitors. One of those inquiries was a carefully worded email to an executive at Phoenix Architecture, testing the waters. The inevitable confrontation happened at an industry awards gala. Amelia was there to accept a Visionary of the Year award. Ethan was there because he had to be. His presence a requirement to maintain the illusion of his dominance. He watched from his table as she walked to the stage, radiant in a simple, elegant black dress, a picture of grace and power. Her acceptance speech was short and impactful. She spoke of building communities, not just buildings. She spoke of architecture as a service, not an indulgence. She never mentioned his name, but every word was a condemnation of his entire philosophy. Later, he cornered her near the terrace, the city lights twinkling behind them like a scene from their past. "This is quite a show you're putting on, Amelia," he sneered, his voice low and venomous. "You and that old snake, Sterling." Amelia looked at him, not with the pain of a jilted wife, but with the cool assessment of a rival CEO. The years of heartache had forged something unbreakable within her. She was no longer afraid of him. "It's not a show, Ethan," she replied calmly. "It's just good business. You think you can take me on?" He laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. "I will bury you. I'll tell the world everything. How you were unstable, emotional." She cut him off, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. "You do that. You drag your pregnant wife's name through the mud and see how that plays out for you in the press. You think you look like a titan now? You'll look like a monster. The woman you tried to destroy, the one you called complacent and uninspiring, is the one who is making you obsolete. Your mistake wasn't leaving me, Ethan. Your mistake was underestimating me." She held his gaze for a long moment, letting the truth of her words sink in. He saw no fear in her eyes, no lingering affection. He saw only a formidable opponent who knew exactly where to strike. Without another word, Amelia turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone on the terrace, the chill of the night air seeping into his bones. He was no longer looking at his discarded wife. He was looking at the architect of his ruin. The phoenix had risen, and its shadow was beginning to eclipse his entire empire. The duel between Phoenix Architecture and Vance and Sterling Holdings became the talk of New York's financial world. It was a battle of philosophies played out in steel, glass, and concrete. For every soulless, extravagant tower Ethan announced, Amelia would counter with an elegant, sustainable, and critically acclaimed project that won the hearts of the city and its planners. His empire, built on the shifting sands of ego and leverage, began to crumble under the weight of its own hubris. His gambles had failed to pay off. A luxury condo project in Dubai went bust, leaving the company exposed to massive foreign debt. His increasingly erratic behavior at board meetings alienated the few allies he had left. The final, desperate nail in his coffin was an attempt to secure a merger with a larger international conglomerate. They did their due diligence and saw the truth: Vance and Sterling was a house of cards, propped up by debt and a CEO whose reputation was in tatters. The deal collapsed spectacularly. While Ethan was fighting fires, Amelia was playing a different, far more strategic game. Her target was not Vance and Sterling. That would be too easy. Too direct. Her revenge was to be more poetic. With Julian Sterling's guidance and capital, she had been quietly, patiently, and anonymously buying up shares in another company, Innovate Architecture. It was the firm that had nurtured her talent and then cast her out at Ethan's command. It was the firm where Michael Renner, her former mentor, still sat as CEO. A man who had traded his loyalty for a lucrative contract with Ethan's company. Innovate was struggling. A mid-tier firm being squeezed out by giants like Vance and Sterling and nimble visionaries like Phoenix. Its stock was undervalued. And its shareholders were getting restless. It was ripe for the picking. Through a series of shell corporations set up by Sterling's legal team, Amelia became its largest single shareholder. No one on the board knew. They just saw a mysterious new investor steadily increasing their stake. The day she reached a controlling interest, she acted. An email was sent to the board of Innovate Architecture, invoking a clause in the corporate bylaws that allowed the majority shareholder to call an emergency meeting. The agenda was listed as a strategic acquisition proposal. The board members gathered in their sleek, sterile conference room. The same room Amelia had once presented her designs in. There was a nervous energy in the air. Michael Renner, his face etched with worry, stood at the head of the table. The door opened, and in walked Julian Sterling's lead attorney. "Good morning," the lawyer said. "The majority shareholder of this company has a proposal for you. They have authorized the acquisition of Innovate Architecture in its entirety. The deal is non-negotiable and overwhelmingly backed by shareholder interest." A wave of murmurs went through the room. Who is the shareholder?" Renner demanded. The lawyer simply smiled and stepped aside, holding the door open. Amelia Hayes walked in. A stunned, absolute silence fell over the room. Jaws literally dropped. Michael Renner stared at her, his face draining of all color. He looked like he had seen a ghost. She was not the desperate, pregnant woman begging him for a job. She was dressed in a tailored, commanding power suit. Her expression calm. Her eyes holding a glint of cold, hard steel. She walked to the head of the table, placing her briefcase down softly on the polished wood. She looked directly at Michael Renner. "Hello, Michael," she said, her voice even and clear, resonating with an authority he had never heard from her before. "It's been a long time." She didn't need to raise her voice. Her very presence was a thunderclap. She was no longer the liability. She was the owner. As of 9 a.m. This morning, she announced to the stunned room, "Phoenix Architecture has acquired a controlling interest in this firm. We are now your parent company." She let that sink in, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the men who had deemed her unemployable. Then, her eyes settled back on Renner. 3 years ago," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "I came to you for help. I was a loyal employee who had given this firm some of its most acclaimed work. I was also pregnant and desperate. And you told me I was a liability. You said it was unwise to associate with me because you were afraid of losing Ethan Vance's business." She paused, letting the memory hang in the air like a guillotine. "Well, Ethan Vance's business is now worthless. And you, Michael, Made a bad investment. You traded your integrity for a client who was already on a sinking ship. That's not just disloyal. It's poor leadership. She looked around the room. Phoenix architecture is about vision, loyalty, and courage. It is about building things that last. We have no room for anyone who does not share those values. She turned her full attention back to the pale, trembling man at the end of the table. Michael Renner, she said. The words crisp and final. You're fired. The news of the hostile takeover and the dramatic firing sent an earthquake through the industry. Vance and Sterling Holdings, now completely isolated and financially hemorrhaging, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy a week later. It was checkmate. Amelia hadn't just defeated her king. She had captured the entire board. The fall of Ethan Vance was as swift as it was brutal. The bankruptcy proceedings stripped him of everything: the company, the penthouse, the private jet. He was a pariah in the world he had once ruled. A cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Isabella Rossi, ever the survivor, had vanished long before the final collapse, having cashed out her shares and moved to Europe. Her name surfacing months later on the arm of a Swiss banker. She had never been a partner. She had been a passenger. And she had jumped ship at the first sign of trouble. The last time Amelia saw Ethan wasn't in a boardroom or a courtroom, but in a fleeting, anonymous moment. She was in a town car heading to a site meeting when she saw him on the street. He was a ghost of his former self, thinner, stooped, his expensive suit replaced by clothes that didn't quite fit. He was staring up at the new Phoenix architecture headquarters. A stunning, innovative building that had just won the coveted Pritzker Prize, the highest honor in architecture. His face was a mask of hollow regret. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second through the tinted glass. There was no anger left in his gaze. Only the vast, empty expanse of defeat. The car moved on. And he was gone. Amelia's victory was complete. But it didn't taste of vengeance. It tasted of vindication. Her focus was not on the empire she had toppled, but on the one she was building. The final scene of her transformation was not set in a corporate tower, but on a once derelict plot of land in the Bronx. It was a piece of land Vance and Sterling had acquired years ago, slated for another luxury high-rise that would have cast a shadow over the working-class neighborhood. Now, it was the site of the grand opening of the Mina's Place Community Center. It was Amelia's masterpiece, a beautiful, light-filled building that housed a daycare, a public library, a job training center, and a rooftop garden that provided fresh produce for the local community. It was everything she believed architecture should be: hopeful, helpful, and human. A crowd had gathered for the opening ceremony: city officials, community leaders, and the families who would use the center. In the front row sat Mrs. Petrova, her eyes shining with tears of pride. Next to her, fidgeting in a pretty yellow dress, was Mina, now a bright-eyed 6-year-old, looking up at her mother on the podium with pure adoration. Amelia stepped to the microphone, the setting sun glinting off the building behind her. They say the best revenge is living well, she began, her voice clear and strong, carrying over the crowd. But I've learned that's not quite right. The best revenge is building well. It's about taking the broken pieces of your life and using them not to build a fortress of anger, but to lay the foundation for something better. Something that serves others. She spoke not of her personal struggles, but of the power of community, of resilience, and of the shared responsibility to build a world our children would be proud to inherit. Her gaze found Mina in the crowd, and a warm, genuine smile lit up her face. "This building is named for my daughter, Mina," she said, "to remind me, and all of us, that our true legacy isn't in the skylines we dominate, but in the futures we help to grow." Later, after the speeches and the applause, she stood on the rooftop garden with Mina, looking out at the sprawling city. The Manhattan skyline, where her old life had played out, was visible in the distance. But her back was to it. She was looking forward, at the vibrant neighborhood her work was helping to revitalize. She was no longer Amelia Vance, the millionaire's wife. Nor was she just a H. Phoenix, the anonymous blogger. She was Amelia Hayes, the CEO of Phoenix Architecture, a visionary who was reshaping the city, and a mother who had built a safe and beautiful world for her daughter. The ultimate revenge wasn't destroying Ethan Vance. It was proving him wrong. It was building a life so full of purpose, integrity, and love that his betrayal became nothing more than the prologue to a much greater story. She was the architect of her own life, and the foundation was unbreakable. Amelia Hayes' incredible story is a powerful testament to the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. It's a journey that takes us from the highest peaks of luxury to the desolate valleys of betrayal and back to a summit far greater than the one she left behind, a summit she built with her own two hands. Her story proves that our deepest wounds can become the source of our greatest power. And that true success isn't about getting revenge, but about rewriting your own destiny. What did you find most inspiring about Amelia's comeback? Have you ever witnessed someone turn a devastating setback into their ultimate triumph? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. If you were moved by this incredible journey of resilience and justice, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own strength. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more unforgettable stories of triumph against all odds. Thank you for watching.